Can't cover everything. All right. So, I need to get this going. Slideshow. So last week, did you press recording now? Okay, good. Last week we asked, I addressed some of the questions that the Israelites may have been asking coming out of Egypt. Remember, I did a little bit of an illustration talking about a phone conversation, and you are like a child listening to your mom's phone conversation. You're just eavesdropping, trying to figure out what what they are talking about. I think many of us have done that before, right? So that is really how we interpret, and that is we are trying to guess what are the questions that are being asked, what are the needs that they have, what is Moses, in this case, speaking into. And so Moses is speaking into questions such as, how did we end up as slaves into Egypt? And so Moses is answering that in the book of Genesis, because they end up in Egypt at the end of the story. Who is God? So if God is calling us out of Egypt, Moses is saying that, and well, who is this God? What happened? How should we worship God? What happened to the covenant with Abraham? So they don't have a book of Genesis. All right, nothing. They don't have any textual script, nothing on text, nothing on paper. All right, so what happened to the covenant with Abraham? They know from oral tradition that their patriarch, their forefather that they have come forth from, has that God had spoken to him. And who is this God? What are we? Who are we as a people? Are we just slaves? 400 years. You would have lost all your identity if you had an identity. Of course, they were a small group of people to start with in the end of Genesis. But coming out of Egypt, there would be an estimate of 2 million people that would have come out. Why is there evil and suffering in the world? Why do I suffer? Why am I a slave? All right, so many questions that Moses is trying to address. Also, we have talked about covenants and the importance of covenants. It's the glue that keeps society together. I can arrange with Bill that I'm going to paint his house, and then because he promised that he was going to pay me $100 for it, I need to trust that I am going to get my $100. And if people cannot trust each other, you can't function. And there is that kind of arrangement, and we call that covenants that we make under having the fear of God upon us, knowing that even if only Bill and I in the room are making this arrangement, we are God-fearing, we believe, even if maybe Bill believes a different God than I believe in, because remember, we are in a pagan society, but we are all aware, we all worship gods, and so we are fearing these gods. So if Bill doesn't give me the $100, he will fear that his God will strike him. All right, so that is kind of like strike him with lightning or something like that. All right, so even though we worship different gods, we can still function as a society because we are aware of the presence of gods around us, and they are listening in. And so when Bill promised to give me $100, then he has no choice but to fulfill that. All right, so that is the idea of covenant, very important. They are legally binding obligations, all right? Often they are sealed with a meal and sometimes also with a sacrifice. And we will see 6 covenants that were made, 3 that man made with God, 3 that man made with man, okay, like a contract. All right, good. So those are very important for you to remember, because later in the story of the Bible, it will come back again and again and again. All right? When God makes promises to the people, to his people, and those are called covenants. All right? So it's a statement of promise, but often with conditions attached. All right? So what did God promise Abraham? All right? A great nation will come forth from you in Genesis chapter 12. Yeah? I will give you a great name. Okay? Even now, the name Abraham is honored in Christianity, Judaism, and in Islam. So that is fulfilled. I will give you a great name. You will be very famous. You will be a blessing. Okay? You will be a blessing to all the families of the earth. To all the nations of the earth, depending on what translation you're looking at. Now, how can he be a blessing to all the nations? How is Abraham a blessing to me? And it is because by your offspring, it says in Genesis 22 verse 18. And Paul in the New Testament will later explain that offspring is in the singular. So he is having, prophetically, God is, well, obviously God is speaking, God already indicates to Abraham that it will be one particular seed, one particular offspring, that the nations of the world will be blessed. Now, initially, we assume offspring of Abraham is Israel, the nation Israel. What later will come to us is the revelation that it is not just Israel, but little Israel, meaning one person, one Israelite, that is Jesus, and he will be the blessing to the nations of the earth. It's very crucial. Right in the beginning, 2,000 years before Jesus even came, that already was spoken out in the time of Abraham. All right, and God is going to work out His plan. All right, God promised Abraham land, that his descendants will occupy the land that he was called to go to in Genesis chapter 12, and shortly after will be there, and God will continue to speak to him. And so in chapter 12 verse 7 it says that when you get there, that land I will give to you, to your descendants, which we know as becoming the nation Israel in the land of Israel. All right. He also promised many descendants, just like, look at the stars, you can't count them, that many descendants you will have, and so forth. So, many descendants being promised. All right, just as Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness, again, remember I said sacrifice does not bring salvation, but sacrifice plus faith equals salvation. Remember that? We've been discussing that every week so far yet. Very important concept. Even at the time of Abraham, that was the case. It's not like that the New Testament is different from the Old Testament. It's always the case. God always looks for the heart attitude of man. And of course, faith is something that is something you do with your heart. It is something that's reflected in your attitude, not in rituals. All right? But so we do have, so just as Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness, know that in those of faith, and know then that it is those of faith who are the sons of Abraham. So it is, you and I are becoming an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham. How? By having faith. All right, that is what Paul is saying to the Galatians. Know then that it is those of faith who are the sons of Abraham, who are Israelites. And the scripture foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith. So even right now here in Genesis, we have read something that God is foreseeing salvation for you and me, the Gentiles. Preach the gospel beforehand to Abraham. In a way, the gospel is already proclaimed in Genesis. All right? In you shall all the nations be blessed. We just read that in Genesis chapter 12. The summary right there. So then, those who are of faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith. So, whatever Abraham is inheriting, I am inheriting with Abraham. It is whatever the blessing that comes with Abraham will be mine. So it says, he who blesses Abraham shall be blessed, who curses Abraham shall be cursed. All right, means we are participate in the blessings with Abraham. Now it is spiritual. I'm not going to go and move to the physical nation Israel anymore. That era is gone. We are now in the era of the church, and we are descendants of Abraham by faith, Paul says to the Galatians. All right, good. We have to move on. So Isaac. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the patriarchs of the nation Israel. That's why you read all of those in one session last week. And so now, Isaac is kind of like, there's not much said about Isaac. Do you notice that? There is a lot being shared about Abraham. There is a lot we read about Jacob. But Isaac is kind of a connecting figure. He is not that major in the book. But we still have to ask ourselves, as a good Bible student, why is Moses talking about Isaac in the story? And what is his main point? Now he is only talking, there is only one chapter spent on Isaac, and that is Genesis 24. I think it's maybe 24, 25. And so, excuse me for a second. So we are talking about Isaac, which is 24 to, well actually it's 24 to 27, that talks about Isaac and Rebekah. All right? It's the story when Abraham, it's a story where it is being stressed that Abraham doesn't want Isaac to marry anybody from the land that he is living in. Isaac is not to marry a Canaanite. Esau later will marry a Canaanite when we talk about Jacob and Esau being born from Rebekah's womb. But what was clear here is Abraham doesn't want Isaac to marry somebody in Canaan. All right? And that's really what the whole chapter is about. Do not intermarry, we're going to later the Israelites are being told, do not intermarry with the Canaanites, because if you do, you become like them. You will be worshiping their gods. And I want you to worship only me. But not only worship their gods, you will do the same practices of the Canaanite practices, which means you will worship babies to the gods. Live babies are burned to the gods of Moloch and Baal. And that is what they were doing. There is all kinds of sodomy taking place, sexual sins, terrible perverted things that the Canaanites were doing. And for that, they were being judged, and they were to be eliminated, eradicated from the land. And God was going to use the Israelites for that. But you can't do that if you intermarry. And so Moses makes already very clear in the Genesis story that Abraham was very adamant about it, that his child will marry somebody from his tribe. And so he had to go all the way home to Laban, to meet up with Laban, a cousin of Abraham, and would marry a daughter of Laban. Okay, that's what the story is about when it talks about Isaac. And that's about it. And so then when Isaac marries Rebekah, and they have two children, and the oldest is Esau and the youngest is Jacob. They're twins. They're only like a second of 1 minute apart, but you still have the oldest and the youngest. The oldest always will be the one who has the birthright, the first son's birthright. He will have certain privileges, and that was given naturally in that society, was given to Esau. But then we see the story about Jacob stealing Esau's birthright. Do you remember that story about the lentil soup and everything, or the red stew, that Esau is coming home from hunting and he's very hungry, and so sell me your birthright and you can have the soup. And so Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of soup. All right, now you think, why is that important? We'll talk about that in just a moment. So we have Esau, and so the descendants of Esau will become the Edomites. Now remember, when Moses writes this down, it's already 400 or 500 years later, much later than when the story actually happened. Actually, it's 600 years later when you add it all up. So now we have tribes, we have people somewhere in the land, and some of them are the descendants of this Esau, and they are called the Edomites. All right. And how are they nicknamed the Edomites? Is because Edom means red. And it happened at the time that Esau his nickname was going to become Edom, meaning red, because he sold his birthright for some red stew. All right? So that is why we now say the Edomites, descendants of Edom. Edom is the nickname of Esau. Then we have Jacob, and of course we do know that Jacob will be our patriarch of Israel, and so he brings forth, he is the line that will eventually turn into this big group of people, tribe called Israelites. All right, so we got that, Jacob. So the firstborn birthright, it says in Deuteronomy, excuse me. What does that mean? It means that he will, number one, get a double portion of the inheritance. So if you have 9 sons, then, and you're old, and you're about to die, then basically the inheritance is arranged in the following way. The land will be cut into 10 pieces. Every son get 1 piece of the land, but the firstborn get 2 pieces. So 9 sons, 10 pieces divided. So they get a double portion of the inheritance. Do you understand that? All right. So they are being doubly blessed, double blessed. All right. Why? Because they also have a responsibility. So they are being privileged by getting so much land. But the reason why is because they are also the head of the clan. So the leadership of this clan, of this family, is being passed on, the headship. Okay, which means is that you are responsible for the clan. And remember, they live together. They live like in villages together. All right, sons marry they find wives and they marry and so forth, and they form a clan, a group, a family, extended family, I should say. And the firstborn is always the one who is in charge. All right, so it's also a spiritual headship where the first one, he has to like pray to the gods on behalf of the family. All right, so there is a spiritual responsibility, and there is also a practical, a responsibility of an administrational responsibility or a governing responsibility to be the head of the tribe, like a little king in this clan family. All right, so there is a double portion and a spiritual headship of the family clan, and that is going to be very important to understand the book of Genesis. All right, so we have Abraham, Isaac, and then we come to Jacob. Jacob, again, God gives the same promises to Jacob he also gave to Abraham. I will be with you. I will bring you back to this land. So Jacob had left because he deceived Esau and stole his birthright, and he did it twice. Remember, he was also going to get the blessing from his father when his father was very old, and Jacob made, together with his mom, conspired and made his skin that was actually very, no hair, and put some animal skin or something on it and make it very hairy. And Jacob fooled his dad, and so the blessing that was supposed to go to Esau went to Jacob and cannot be reversed. Whoa. Again, how can you say it cannot be reversed? Remember, they believe that these things are done under heaven when their gods are listening in. And everything that's done is like the idea of covenant, it's settled. Later in the book of Joshua, you will see a story where Joshua makes an agreement with the Gibeonites in the land. And the Gibeonites, they acted like they were from a faraway land, but they were not. They were living right next door. And so under false pretense, they came to Joshua and made a contract, made an agreement, an alliance. And then the next day, Joshua found out that they were neighbors next door. They are not from a faraway land, and yet, because of the agreement, he could not now eliminate the Gibeonites from the land that he was supposed to do by God. God told him to do that. The Canaanites, it's one group of Canaanites. And he could not, because of this arrangement that was made under God. So the things that are spoken are very important in their mindset, cannot be revoked. The blessing has gone to Jacob. Even though deception was involved, it cannot go anymore to Esau. There is nothing left, Isaac says to Esau, that I can give you. I gave it to your brother. And so Esau was very angry and went after Jacob, trying to kill him, but Jacob fled. And so
why had Rachel done this? Because she was from the same tribe.
Right.
Right? Why?
Because, well, number one, it's
Jacob was her
favorite son.
Yeah.
So there is favoritism involved. All right? So maybe because Jacob was the mommy's boy, always at home. Esau was the hunter, always out in the field. So Isaac loved Esau, and Rebekah loved Jacob.
So possibly it was a revenge toward her own husband because he didn't love Jacob as much as Esau.
Maybe, yeah. Yes.
I kind of same question with her,
Right.
but why they didn't change that? Because this is what I see is wrong. Because they say Jacob, for now he has shit me twice. I mean, he tricked, he lied, but why God didn't change that? Why? I mean, nowadays if that happened, for example, you're gonna get a lawyer and gonna say, look, this is approved. They did something wrong.
Right. Okay, remember. So remember again, the stories that we read in Genesis are not like Abraham was not the most righteous Christian, most righteous person on earth, right? God still used Abraham. And God is also using this. Man is manipulating, man is deceptive, but God is going to use it for his own purposes because he already determined that the line of promise, the offspring of the woman, the seed of the woman that is going to destroy the head of the snake back in Genesis, right? It's going to come forth from a certain lineage. And this lineage is going to be carried not by the firstborn, but by the secondborn, which is going to be Jacob. So God is always, many times you see that God is going into the reverse of what is custom. What I just shared about spiritual headship, that is ancient custom by all of the civilizations there. Yeah, but God says, I'm bigger than that. I can do whatever I want, and I have chosen Jacob over Esau. And that was already determined while, hold on a second. That is already determined while they were still in, I don't have the scripture reference here, but so that was, remember that the twins were in the womb of Rebekah, and it says, and so basically there is a struggle in the womb of Rebekah, and there is a prophecy prophesied already that the younger will serve the older. All right, so there is like but it's supposed to be the other way around. And God is often going a different way. Why? Because he's showing us that nothing is deserved by us. Abraham was not righteous by himself, but because he had faith, righteousness was imputed upon him, Paul says. And we see that Jacob was a deceiver. I loved Esau much better than, I liked Esau much better in the story than Jacob. Because he is a supplanter, okay? He is a supplanter, he is a deceiver, all right? But God is also, and we're going to see that in the story, God is also in the business of change. And Abram has changed over the years to the point that he even was willing to surrender Isaac back to God. We talked about that last week. But we're also going to see that Jacob is changing. And God is working, and then when he flees to Laban, he finds his match because Laban will deceive Jacob. And so we see that God is at work in the life of Jacob. And then when Jacob leaves the land of Laban and goes back to his land, to his own people, to his own land, you'll see that Jacob is wrestling with an angel. You remember that? And then he will be having his hip will be replaced, or how you call it, like he will have something happening to his hip so that he will always walk crooked a little bit, right? As a reminder of his struggle with this angel. But at that time, his name has changed. His name changed from Jacob to Israel. That's how we get the name Israel for. And I think, and I forgot now, but I think it means prince. And so he made this Jacob, that means deceiver, and he is turning it into a prince. So God is in the business of of making change, of bring change to people. All right? I have to double check on the name of Israel again. I think it has something with Prince in it, but I now briefly forgot. All right? So, the way people behave, we can ask ourselves, why did God allow it? But maybe we need to go beyond that and say, you know what, I'm a deceiver too sometimes. I'm a sinner too. And God, it is also by grace that God has accepted me into his family. And, you know, that he has adopted me as one of his sons. All right? Anyway, so all these promises, you know, it's not because you're great, Jacob. It just happens that I've chosen you. All right? It's all just based upon faith. And families, all the families blessed because of you and your offspring. Again, well, God said to Abraham is now extended, the same promise is to Jacob. All right? All right, now we come to what you just read this week. You read chapter 37 to 50. Yeah? And so all we read is Judah and Joseph, but mostly about Joseph actually. And there is actually one chapter spent on Judah. And again, they are not the greatest examples of, especially Judah, is not exactly a great example to follow. But even Joseph seems like in the beginning when he was still young, a spoiled brat. All right? Because Jacob had 12 sons, and Joseph was his favorite. And so he was being spoiled. And then one day he had a vision, and in the vision he saw that his father and mother and all of his fellow brothers will bow down to him. And so what does he do the next day? He goes up to them and tells them about his dream. I said vision, but I think I meant dream. All right? Who do you think you are, Joseph? You think that we are going to serve you? And so they despised him. Maybe not very clever, right? Oh, I think, let me share you my dream and you're all going to serve me. You know, maybe it's something that God truly said, but maybe, and God sometimes gives us visions, but maybe God also says, now I want you to stay quiet about it. You know, you don't want to achieve what it's going to be God's work, not your work. So you don't want to do it in your own strength. So you have to trust God. In his time, he will give you this position. Just like David. David was anointed king when he was still a teenager, but he waited many, many years. He waited for God's time. He didn't impose his own will on it and allow it to happen in God's time. And that we need to learn how to do that also when God gives us dreams and visions, that it will be in his time and not our time that these things come to pass. So Joseph was also a bit of a spoiled brat, but he came around really quickly. I mean, Joseph, more than anybody, is a great example of somebody that knows how to forgive. And we'll talk about that later. Let me first talk about Judah. So now we have gone very fast. Oh, by the way, let me just, how did Jacob changed? All right. I'm going to talk about Jacob a little bit, and then I'll go back to Judah and Joseph, yeah? Now, when Jacob returned back to the land, and he entered into the land, and he had a dream again in a certain place, and he saw a ladder from heaven. And he saw angels descending and ascending on that ladder. It's in Genesis chapter 28. Remember that still? That story. And he says, whoa, I am here in the house, like at the entrance of the house of God. And therefore he calls it Bethel. And so now we have a village near Jerusalem called Bethel, which means the house of God. And so Jacob had this particular vision. Now remember, God is in the business of changing Jacob. And he was a deceiver, but his name was changed and he came back to the promised land. He was not killed by Esau. All right? And so when he entered into the land, he saw this vision of this ladder. And then he says, he calls it Bethel, and then he continues. He also makes promises to God and has an altar built and made sacrifice to God. And shortly after that, he was going to meet up with Laban. Oh, I'm sorry. I think maybe That was actually the latter story, is on the way out to when he was leaving the promised land. The story about wrestling, when he was wrestling with the angel, was when he was coming back. So he had a spiritual experience on his departure of the land, and he also had a spiritual experience returning back. Now, why do I say all this? All right, because when we come to the Gospels, and we see this one disciple that Jesus is recruiting, and you read it in John chapter 1, verse 47 onwards, and Jesus is calling this one disciple, and his name is Nathanael. All right, and then Nathanael, okay, and it says in John chapter 1, verse 47, when Jesus saw Nathanael coming towards him, he said of him, "Here is truly an Israelite whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, "Where did you get to know me? Where did you get to know me?" Jesus answered, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You shall see greater things than these." All right? Now, why is Jesus saying to Nathanael, there is no deceit in you? All right? It reminds me of the story of Jacob that was a deceiver. He was all about deception. And now he says to Nathanael, here is one man in Israel that has no deceit. And then Jesus says the following line, verse 51 of John chapter 1, and Jesus said to Nathanael, "Truly, truly, I tell you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon what? Upon the Son of Man." Upon the Son of Man. So Jesus is alluding to the very vision that Jacob had. And Jacob saw in the vision angels coming down and going up to heaven on a ladder. Yeah? It's kind of like the blessings are coming down from God, and our prayers are being brought to the presence of God. That is what the angels are doing. They're connecting earth with heaven. My prayers are going up with the angels. God's blessings are coming down, right? But then Jesus says, Nathanael, number one, there is no deceit in you. This Jacob, this deceiver, is being totally restored by the work that I'm about to do in Israel. Because he's going to change our hearts, Jesus is. All right? I am a man. God is somebody that is... God is interested in changing us, in forming us, in molding us. But also Jesus says, I am the gates. I am the way to this heaven. You saw angels going up. Jacob saw angels on a ladder to go up, but you will see angels going up and coming down on who? On the Son of Man. I am the ladder, Jesus says. I am the way to God, Jesus says. So that is kind of like how I bring the connection with Jacob, and how Jacob being restored, God is changed, his character is being changed, and God is all about that, about changing. Though they are not perfect, all right, they are forgiven by faith. They're made righteous by faith. And then, but still God is going to change them. And so here we have. So we have Jacob. Then we have Judah. Judah in Genesis chapter 38, I think it is. It is like one chapter. And you know what? It's a terrible story. Yeah. It's a terrible story. Because what does Judah do? Judah sleeps with a prostitute. Or what he thinks is a prostitute. So what happened is Judah is marrying, and by the way, he's doing something stupid. He's marrying a Canaanite woman, all right? And then he has 3 sons, but 2 of the sons are struck death, all right, by God. That is what the story says. And so what happens then? Okay, the wife of the deceased son of Judah, her name is Tamar, has no offspring yet, no son. And it was tradition in that culture that if your husband dies, then you become the brother of the deceased will marry you as a woman so that you can have offspring in the name of the deceased husband. We call that the levirate marriage. Okay? And so it is a custom. It's also a form of social welfare, because if you are a widow and you have no sons, nobody will take care of you. So it's very important for the woman to have a son, so that when she is older, she will be cared for. And so the ancient law says that if your husband dies, then you will marry the brother, so that you will have offspring that way, and you will be cared for. But Judah refused to do this because his first son died, his second son died, he only had one son left, but the son was young, and so she sent her away and said, come back when he's older, or when he's of age, but then he never allows her to come back and marry her third son. So what has happened then is she dresses her up as a prostitute at one of those pagan temples, because all of those Canaanite temples, there would always be women at the entrance of the temple servicing the man, basically, just prostitution. And so Judah did that. He went to one of those pagan temples, saw this woman, assumed that she was a prostitute, and slept with her, and then she was with child. And so then suddenly the whole thing comes out, because I think Tamar held back like a staff of Judah and one other item, I think, maybe a ring as like a deposit, because he hadn't been able to pay her yet. But then she disappears, and so this is gone. And then she will come up and say, you're the man that made me pregnant, by showing the evidence of this staff. Right? You remember the story? Okay. Why is all that in here? Okay. Yes.
Same thing with the polygamy, like Jacob, he had like 4 or 5 wives. I mean, it was looked like it was the culture there, because everybody get different wives, and then if they cannot have babe, they get the maid, and was looked like was right, because even in the back here, like that's way back in Genesis 19:31. The daughters of Lot make him drunk.
Yes.
To have babies. I mean,
That's incest.
yeah, and then he said when he was come out from the 2 city was going to destroy, he said, I want to go to the village, and then he went to the village. I think there is people there. Why the daughter should do that? I mean, so look like this.
But that's not the question we need to ask.
Yeah.
The first and foremost question we ask our Bible students is, why is the story in the Bible?
She's going to become important later on.
Right. So in the case of Lot, we will have the Ammonites and the Moabites are going to be descendants. That is another 2. Later when I show you, for example, here we have here you see Moab. Okay, this is Israel. We have the Moabites living here, and we have the Ammonites living here. They are the descendants of Lot. I mentioned Edom already. Edomites, they are living here. So this is the descendants of Esau. So all that has to do with, you know, why the main question you always ask, the fact that it happened, I mean, the fact that it's written down, and it's just written down the way it happened. That's just what they did. They are not, Moses is not saying nice things necessarily about Lot, or about Abraham, or about Jacob. These are the things that happened. What we need to ask ourselves, the most important question that we need to ask ourselves in order to understand a book better, like a book like Genesis, is why did the author put the story in there? And then you begin to see the big picture of the book. And we're going to do that for the whole of the Bible eventually. Yeah? Okay, so the question then again is, though terrible things happened, Judah did terrible things, why is God, why did Moses write that story in the Bible, in the book of Genesis? Not for me, but for the people coming out of Egypt. That is very important. Yeah? Okay, good. Now let me explain that. I shared already earlier about the importance of spiritual headship and so forth, right? Where was that again? Here. Okay? The firstborn birthright. Yeah? Okay, the firstborn birthright means that the person gets a double portion of the inheritance and also will become the spiritual headship. Will be responsible for the whole clan, the family. Yeah? Very important, right? Now, what happened is Jacob has 12 sons and Reuben is the oldest. So in the natural, in the normal way of doing things, Reuben will be receiving this particular responsibility and privilege. Double inheritance, spiritual headship. But just like God has been doing this already several times in the reverse, even though this is custom in the world, God has another plan. Now, Reuben will sleep with one of Jacob's wives. And so there is incest involved. And so it says when Jacob, in the end of the story of Genesis, prophesies and speak over every of his sons, there will be a curse upon Reuben because he slept with a concubine of Jacob. Yeah? So he also has lost, like Esau, the first son's birthright, which is given to somebody else. And who is it going to be given? To Judah. But Judah is only number 4 in the series of 12. He is actually down the line, but God in his wisdom somehow decided it has to be Judah. Judah, later in the Genesis story, you will see that he will function. You remember when that story goes about Joseph being in Egypt, and then there is a famine in the land, and then Jacob sends his sons to Egypt and so forth. Who is the spokesperson before the Pharaoh, or before Joseph, even though they didn't recognize Joseph? It is Judah. Judah is becoming, by the end of the story, we see that Judah has become the one who is assuming the responsibility of spiritual headship.
But wasn't Judah even the one, when the brothers wanted to kill Joseph, say, let's not kill the boy?
Right, he was, so, right, exactly. Yeah. So even though this terrible thing happened, this bad thing, that's exactly my point. And that is, we have a Judah that was bad, sleeping with a prostitute, not giving what was due to Tamar, and let one of his sons marry her so that she has offspring. He was depriving her from that, which in that civilization was an awful thing to do. So he was a bad dude, but God was changing Judah. God was changing Judah too. So how do I know? Well, at least that is what Moses seems to be writing. Because Moses says exactly what you just said about Judah. Judah actually didn't want Joseph to be sold in slavery and so forth. So he was already not with everybody else. He was not with the 10 brothers. And then later when he was going, even Jacob will be talking to Judah. Okay, now when you go, when you talk to the Pharaoh, do this and that. So even Jacob was recognizing now spiritual headship. Judah is the one in charge. He is basically the one that's supposed to be what the firstborn was. Now, but when we also go on and we see at the end of Genesis, who is getting the double portion? Who is getting the double portion? Remember, that is the second thing that the firstborn gets. It is Joseph's sons, Abraham and Manasseh, which are not sons of Jacob. They are the sons of Joseph. So Joseph gets the double portion of the inheritance when the land is going to be distributed. All right? They will inherit land. So how does that happen? Because you have 12 tribes, you have 12 sons of Jacob, but later on when they go into the land, a tribe, the Levites, will not get land. So then you're down to 11. But then Joseph has gotten the double inheritance, the two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and they get each a piece of land, and then you're back to 12. Yeah? So the blessing was already given back in Genesis. It is going, the audience realizes, the Israelites realize now that we are about to inherit, about to go to our land, that is how it will be distributed, the land, the inheritance. All right, the double portion of the inheritance. But there is one more thing, and that is the offspring of the woman, the seed that will bring Jesus forth, is here too. We're talking about that as well. And that is also being passed on by who? Not by Reuben, but by Judah. David is going to be the son of, is going to be a descendant of Judah. And when we talk about, when you read in Genesis 49 about all the blessings that Jacob speaks over Judah, there is like this scepter, the scepter shall not depart from you. Scepter is like the scepter of a king will not depart from you. So even Jacob already is prophesying something beyond anybody's imagination, and that is that you kings will come forth from you. All right? And true, Jesus, the kings of Jerusalem are all descendants from one tribe, and it's the tribe of Judah. Okay? And of course, Jesus is the ultimate king, also coming forth. All right? And so that is about Judah. Also interestingly, because Judah behaved so bad, all right, he actually will not hit the offspring of the woman. Well, the Jesus will not come from the normal lineage of Judah and his wife having an offspring, but it will be Judah with this Tamar. And then the line will continue from Judah having slept with what he thought was a prostitute, a Canaanite woman, and Jesus will come forth from that. Just like later we have other stories like Ruth, who is a Moabite and so forth, and you see that in the lineage that eventually God will produce the son, produce this Savior, Messiah, that there are also many Gentiles involved in coming this about. So there is also a spiritual element right there of how God is working out his redemptive plan. All right? So much said about why. That was all to answer the question, why is the story of Judah and Joseph? Why are these two stories in the book of Genesis? What is it communicating to the Israelites? All right? Just talking about inheritance, a double portion for the sons of Joseph explains that, Manasseh and Ephraim, but also that there is something about Judah that is special. Of course, the Israelites haven't figured out about Messiah, they haven't figured out about Jesus yet. I mean, that goes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years later, but God already put it there as a mystery that is still a secret, but will be revealed, will eventually become aware. People will be able to become aware of it. And so now I give you a handout of the Genesis. That is what we do in our Bible school, and that is like, it is our own big picture overview of the whole book of Genesis. And you read it exactly according to what I made you do, and that is over 3 days, over 3 weeks. You read Genesis 1 to 11, then you read Genesis 12 to 36, and then you read 37 to 50, because that is how I believe Moses has organized the book. There was an agenda, there was a plan, yeah? And so what is the title of the book? Well, Beginnings, because Genesis means beginning. It's the beginning of the world, the ancient world, chapter 1 to 11, but it's also the beginning of Israel. It is also the beginning of sin, Genesis chapter 3, but it's also the beginning of God's redemptive plan, bringing salvation from sin for us. Yeah? So there are many beginnings. So the beginning is probably a good title for the book. And that is then also the main idea of the book. And so that's kind of like the main idea, the most important theme. There are many themes in the book of Genesis, but there is like one common theme that is like waved through the whole text. And that is beginnings. That is the main idea of the book. The beginning of the world builds to the beginning of Israel, God's chosen people. Now the reason written, we talked about already, is to give Israel an identity. Why did Moses write the book? To give Israel an identity, and to explain who God is, that they have never known before. They are discovering about the character and nature and personality of God. All right? His nature is that he is sovereign. Okay, his character is one of just loving. All right, merciful. Okay, but also explains about the covenant that was made with the patriarchs. So those are the three major concepts that we have been stressing on that helps us to understand the whole book. Yeah? Good. Joseph, I promised that I was going to finish with Joseph. How do I see Joseph being like an example of forgiveness? Because even though he was treated so badly, thrown in the pits, and then later, because he was accused falsely, when he, with Potiphar's wife, when he was serving like a house slave in one of those Egyptian households, and so then he was thrown in prison. So he suffered a lot, and he was accused of wrongdoing that he never did, falsely accused several times over. But imagine if you are being sold by your own brothers into slavery, and then the brothers are coming to Egypt, and Moses has no bitterness whatsoever. Even when the moment happened when Joseph revealed himself to them and said, "Hey, it's me, I'm Joseph," they were very much afraid. Whoa, the second most powerful man in all of Egypt is the one we sold into slavery, our own brother. So they expected revenge. But instead, what does Joseph did? Joseph said, "Oh, it is because of God that he brought me into Egypt. God used you, but now I am in Egypt. God sent me here for a time of this when there is a famine, so that God can provide for you through me." And so even when he was explaining, okay, don't worry, I'm not going to take revenge. And then there is a whole paragraph that you can read in Genesis, and he will mention the name of God 5 times, saying God did this. All right, he is able to go beyond looking into his own little world, and he had every reason in the natural. He had every reason to be bitter and angry, but he stepped out of it and saw the bigger picture, what God is doing. So his focus was on God and said, God did this. And so we see an amazing example of somebody. Yes, Joseph was a spoiled brat when he was 16 years old. But through all these difficulties, God was changing Joseph till he became a man of God, an amazing man of God. There is, I think, no greater example other than Jesus of forgiveness in the entire Bible. And we see that in the life of Joseph.
Changing Joseph from being a spoiled brat or just being favored by his father, and from any revenge he may have been feeling during that time.
He's been what?
During that time of all the strife he was going through, up to the point where he met his brothers again.
Are you asking a question?
Changing. You said God is changing.
He must have.
From being a spoiled brat.
Right.
Or from just being favored by his father, or from some of maybe resentfulness that he was feeling to a point, up to the point where he became the God of man. Or
What
man of God.
okay, what did Moses tell you when you read the story? Okay? That's always what we need to ask ourselves, especially when we have questions about how they interrelate and why is this and why is that. And of course, there are wonderful lessons to be learned. One lesson is don't have more than one wife, for example, because you see all the infighting coming in. Jacob has 4, and there's a lot of rivalry between the wives. In fact, they seem to be on it's like a sport almost, like who can crank out more sons. All right, and so there is, there's like a competition going on, and that's all. Those are all valid points. Yeah, those are all valid points. But we don't. Is that the main reason that Moses wrote the story in there? Well, try to discover that when you read it. But remember, you have to interpret not from your perspective in 2015 here in Hawaii, with our modern ideas of how we remember there is a lot of enlightenment that we have received that they are not yet enlightened in. They're just a bunch of pagans behaving in pagan ways. But whatever God is communicating through the book of through the book of Genesis is to Israel that just came out of Egypt. And so the big picture is, okay, why are the 2 sons of Joseph getting a whole piece of land? Well, because we read, that's explained in Genesis. So Levi will be taken now, not getting any land. 2 are being replaced. They understand that by reading the book of Genesis. All right? But also this idea of spiritual headship, that Judah took that role. And so Judah is assuming that role. And then even later, when the people of Israel asked for a king, they got a king, a Benjamite. Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. But that was not God's plan. That was not God's choice. And so when you go into the book of Samuel and you learn about all these strife and battles going on, which king of which tribe should rule us, God has been saying all along from the story in Genesis, it should be from the tribe of Judah. And so eventually God says, okay, I will pick out a son. I will pick up somebody that's going to be king. And so he sends Samuel on a journey, and he brings him all the way to the family of Jesse. And then the youngest of all of his sons, David, who was even in the wilderness taking care of sheep. And God says, that's the one, anoint him to be king. A son of Judah. The spiritual headship is going to be carried forth, it's going to be passed on this way. Yeah? Good. All right, next week, read Exodus 1 to 19. And so we are now in Mount Sinai. So basically, what happened is after they have left Egypt, yeah, they will be on a journey, and you can see that in the maps, in the Nelson Maps and Charts. So look at the maps, and they will end up in Mount Sinai. This is one location where they believe there are several places that they believe could be Mount Sinai, but this is the most common view. And that it will be all the way in the Sinai Peninsula, all the way in the south. And so they are here right now in the story, when Moses is writing the story. Yeah? People have come out of Egypt. And they will be there for a year. All right? But this Exodus, leaving Egypt behind, that story is the first half of the book of Exodus. And then the second half of the book of Exodus, they are going to meet up with God. And they are not moving. They will be at Mount Sinai. All of the remaining of Exodus, and then all of Leviticus, and then the first 10 chapters of Numbers, they're all right here. They do not move. So it's important. It's important for us, for the story to come alive, to, number one, to know the time period we are talking about. Number two, geographically, where are we? Well, they are. Next, you're now going to read about this story, going all the way into Mount Sinai. And then Jeff Carroll next week will be teaching. And he will not go on a rabbit trail. He will be teaching some main pointers about Exodus 1 to 19. I gotta run because I'm also supposed to speak in the main service. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this wonderful book. I pray, Lord, Lord, as we bring closure now to Genesis, that you set us up and get us ready for Exodus as well.